So after all the issues come up and the days that followed the elections in an effort to recount, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party found themselves battling at the state Supreme Court level. So the Republican Party wanted to shut down any form of recount, certify the election from election night, and hand the victory to George W. Bush. The government officials worked for Jeb Bush, so nationwide, the Democratic Party felt that this was a very biased way of looking at it. The Republican Party said these are the people who are in charge. There was no objection to them being in charge prior to election night, so you can't cry now. This has already been set up and agreed to. The Democrats pointed to the numerous forms of voter irregularity, demanded a recount. So there were several different phases in which a recount was done. Eventually, the state Supreme Court demanded an entire state, one by one individual recount, where the actual voting tab would be lifted up in the air. Somebody who worked for the Board of Elections would look at this tab and see whether or not the punch through the ballot hole was done properly or not, or whether or not the intent of the voter could be seen one way or the other. And the ironic thing was the precedent they rested this on was from a Texas case where then Governor George Bush had said this is the proper way we should do recounts. So George Bush's legal team had argued against it. The Democrats rested on this precedent from George Bush when he was governor of Texas. So this was every happy and unhappy coincidence you could imagine all coming together. Followed by that, the Republicans decided to take this to the United States Supreme Court. And the Democrats felt there's no way the United States Supreme Court is going to weigh in on this. It would be seen as a violation of checks and balances. The only decision they could do was decide one way or the other to allow a recount to continue. The Republicans rested their argument that a continued recount would irrevocably harm the substantive due process rights of George Bush as a sitting president. Put simply, they argued that the recount would harm his legitimacy as president of the United States. Now, this is a very liberal argument being offered to conservative judges. Again, in a world of some very unhappy coincidences, a large number of judges sitting on the Supreme Court at the time were appointed by President George Bush back in 1989, 1991, and those before him were appointed by Ronald Reagan when George Bush was vice president, and who undoubtedly was able to weigh in on whether or not these judges could be appointed or not. So Al Gore had then offered the argument that this was unfair because the Supreme Court would be biased and they should recuse themselves of this argument. They didn't, and the Supreme Court stepped in and shut down the recount, essentially naming George Bush president of the United States. Now, all of this controversy was seen as A, a self-inflicted wound on the Supreme Court, who had stepped into an area that they typically had not stepped into, and B, a glaring need for electoral reform. So in the years that, or the immediate year that followed, many people had called for changes at the Electoral College, passed an amendment to the United States Constitution that would eliminate the Electoral College, change the means in which we tabulate votes going to the Electoral College. You name it, there were all sorts of ideas coming out of a commission called the Carter-Ford Commission, a commission that was chaired by then former President Ford, who recently passed away, or not too, and former President Jimmy Carter. They had come up with a set of ideas that would change the Electoral College, change the way we vote, and create a different system or a more modern system. And then 9/11 occurred. And after 9/11, everything shifted over to a foreign policy point of view of the Bush presidency. Many of these issues are still unresolved, and this is the purpose of our debate going forward, whether or not we should revisit the idea of reforming, changing, or eliminating the Electoral College. So in the following slides, there are other videos and websites that will allow you to get prepped for the debate. So I'd like you to prepare to argue one side or the other. You'll be given a side in class. Use the websites to create 5 major points that you're going to argue, and we'll do this debate the next time we get together in class. So please watch the other videos that I've put in here. Take a strong amount of notes, and the better you do with your notes, the better you are going to do on the debate. The debate is considered to be a graded class participation grade for the second quarter. So thank you for watching tonight, and I hope this helps you get ready for our next debate.